The twin suns of Azeron 9 burned across a desert of red stone and shimmering heat, yet within the crystalline halls of the celestial palace, the air was cold, sharp, and heavy with expectation. The walls themselves glowed faintly, etched with runes from a civilization older than memory, refracting light into dancing prisms. For centuries, this planet had been abandoned, a graveyard of a dying empire. Now it was alive again, chosen as neutral ground for the first face-to-face encounter between Earth and the Klytherian Dominion. Lieutenant Ethan Cross stood stiffly among the delegation from Earth, the high collar of his dress uniform tugging at his neck. His hand absently brushed over the silver insignia pinned to his chest, an old heirloom from his grandfather. It bore a strange geometric symbol no one on Earth could ever identify. But here, in the heart of the Klytherian palace, Ethan had the unnerving sense that the walls were whispering it back to him. Beside him, Dr. Mira Solon adjusted her glasses, scanning the alien architecture with eyes that missed nothing. Where Ethan's pulse hammered with nerves, hers hummed with curiosity. "The resonance here," she murmured almost to herself. "It's not just decorative. These walls are alive with data. This whole palace could be one massive recording device." Captain Adrian Holt caught the words, his voice clipped and warning. "Doctor, focus. We're not here to marvel at alien wallpaper. One wrong move, and we're the spark for a war Earth can't win." He was a man of iron discipline, the kind of officer who trusted rules more than people. To him, Ethan was a blunt instrument, useful in a fight, dangerous anywhere else. The chamber doors groaned open, and the light itself seemed to bow as Empress Celara entered. She was unlike anything Ethan had imagined. Her figure was tall and statuesque, cloaked in robes that shimmered like liquid starlight. Her skin was traced with delicate fractal patterns of silver, shifting subtly as if alive, while her eyes burned, an emerald green that seemed to see through every mask. Around her, guards moved like shadows, their armor faceted with crystal. But it was her presence, majestic and fragile all at once, that tightened every throat in the room. "People of Earth." Celara's voice carried like music across stone, translated by the hovering orb of the diplomatic device. "You stand in a place where empires rose and fell long before your world kindled fire. You seek peace. So do we. May this be the beginning of something greater than either of us." Mira tilted her head, analyzing. Ethan could only stare, caught by the strange gravity between them, as though the moment her gaze fell on him, the air thickened, charged with something unspoken. Ambassador lines were delivered, gifts exchanged, words rehearsed. It all unfolded smoothly, a dance of diplomacy. Then, as the ceremony reached its peak, Ambassador Solon turned toward Ethan, nerves pushing her into improvisation. "As a gesture of trust," she said brightly, "perhaps Empress Celara might shake hands with Lieutenant Cross, our security lead." The translation device hummed. The alien guards stiffened. Celara's expression flickered. The orb spat out words that none of them expected. "Perform the rite of binding blood." The chamber froze. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Captain Holt swore under his breath. Celara's emerald eyes widened, then narrowed, her head tilting in regal confusion. The words hung in the silence like a blade drawn across a throat, and then she extended her hand. The moment their hands touched, the crystalline walls pulsed with light. A surge of silver and gold energy wrapped around Ethan and Celara like a living veil, humming with a frequency that rattled bones and shook the heart. Ethan gasped as warmth surged into his chest, searing yet comforting, like fire and water colliding. Celara's eyes widened, her lips parting in a sharp intake of breath. For a heartbeat, the universe held still. Then the glow dimmed, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt dangerous. The Klytherian guards moved instantly, their crystalline spears snapping to attention, but Celara lifted a hand, halting them. Her expression was calm, almost too calm, but Ethan noticed her fingers trembled slightly before she tucked them into her robes. The counselors seated in the gallery, aged Klytherians with scales duller than hers, burst into outraged whispers, their voices slicing through the air. "This is heresy. One of them barked, his voice metallic, echoing unnaturally against the crystal walls. "A human cannot invoke the right. Ancient law forbids it," another snapped. "This cannot stand, Empress." Celara ignored them, though Ethan could see the tension rippling across her shoulders. She stared at him, and in that moment Ethan felt something impossible. A presence in his mind. A faint echo, a whisper not his own, like a second heartbeat thrumming just beneath his skin. "Your Majesty," Ambassador Solon stammered, trying desperately to smooth the chaos. "There has been a mistranslation. This was meant as a handshake, a human greeting." The translation device replayed the phrase, flickered, then spat the same chilling interpretation again. "Rite of binding blood." Captain Holt's voice cut through like a blade. "Cross, what the hell did you do?" He seized Ethan's shoulder, pulling him back with the force of a man barely holding his temper. "You don't move until I say move. Do you have any idea what this looks like?" "I didn't do anything," Ethan hissed back, shaking free. His chest still burned, his pulse erratic. She took my hand." "That wasn't a handshake," Holt growled. "That was a declaration of war disguised as ritual. If you've cursed this mission, Lieutenant, you'll answer for it." Meanwhile, Dr. Mira Solin had slipped toward the translation orb, scanning its readings with her handheld. Her brow furrowed, lips pressed thin. "This isn't a simple error," she muttered more to herself than anyone else. The device didn't mistranslate. It recognized something. The phrase wasn't random. She glanced between Ethan and Celara, her eyes narrowing. "It read biological markers from both of you. It interpreted genetic compatibility." Ethan blinked, thrown. "Compatibility?" Mira looked unsettled, almost shaken. "I need data. Lieutenant, when she touched you, did you feel anything unusual? Pain? Heat? Connection?" Ethan hesitated, unwilling to admit what he felt, that strange tether humming inside him like his body had been rewired in an instant. "I don't know," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Captain Holt stepped forward, pointing a sharp finger at him. "Don't lie to her, Cross. If there's something wrong, we need to know. Earth cannot afford a liability wrapped around its neck." His tone dripped with suspicion, as though Ethan himself had conspired with the Empress. The chamber doors slammed shut as the Klytherian counselors stormed out in fury, their robes flashing with bioluminescent anger. Celara stood frozen, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the hall, her breath uneven. When she finally spoke, her voice was hushed, trembling, not with fear but with something stranger. "I feel—" She placed a hand against her abdomen, her emerald eyes unfocused. "A rhythm that is not mine. A second heartbeat inside me." The chamber fell utterly silent. Even the walls seemed to stop breathing. The council chamber erupted before Celara could speak again. Heavy boots echoed against the crystalline floor, sharp and deliberate, until a figure filled the entrance like a storm. General Veyron strode forward, armor carved from obsidian crystal, every step radiating command. His scales glowed with a deep crimson hue, and his eyes blazed like molten iron. "Enough of this farce!" Veyron's voice thundered, reverberating across the vaulted chamber. "A human soldier dares corrupt the rite of binding blood? This is no accident. This is contamination." He jabbed a clawed finger toward Ethan. "Purge him before the bond spreads further." The Klytherian Council rose to their feet, divided between fear and outrage. Some shouted for restraint, others for execution. Celara raised her hand to calm them, but Veyron cut across her. "You protect the outsider even now? Then you are unfit to rule. The Dominion needs strength, not weakness shackled to alien flesh." Celara's face remained serene, but her voice was steel. "Stand down, General. This chamber still answers to the Empress." But Ethan saw it, the glances between counselors, the hesitation in the guards' eyes. Veyron's words carried weight, too much weight. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. His chest still burned where Celara had touched him, the phantom echo of her second heartbeat thrumming in sync with his. When he finally drifted off, dreams consumed him, not his own. He stood in a body that was not his, tall, silver-scaled, standing beneath a sky lit by 3 moons. In his hands, alien tools etched glowing runes onto a crystal wall. Around him, figures both human and Klytherian worked side by side, their laughter blending into one. Then fire, cities burning, ships fleeing the sky, and voices screaming in languages Ethan somehow understood. He woke with a gasp, sweat chilling his skin. Morning brought worse news. The council convened without warning, and when Celara entered, flanked by loyal guards, the decree was already written. "Until this corruption is understood," the eldest counselor declared, "the Empress is to be confined. She has defiled the purity of our line. Her judgment cannot be trusted." Celara did not resist. She allowed the guards to surround her, regal even in chains of crystal light. Before she was led away, her gaze flicked once to Ethan, an unspoken plea, a spark of defiance. Hands gripped Ethan's arm. It was Kalis, Celara's most trusted advisor, his voice a sharp whisper. "Come, now!" They slipped into the palace's underbelly, racing through narrow halls of crystal veined with light. Behind them, Veyron's voice echoed, commanding the purge of all humans on Azeron 9. Soldiers would be coming. They stopped at a small chamber carved into the rock, ancient runes glowing faintly across the walls. Kalis slammed the door shut, his eyes burning with urgency. "The council is lost. Veyron controls them now, but the Empress entrusted me with something, and I think it ties to you." Ethan's chest tightened. "Why me?" Kalis gestured to the walls. Symbols spiraled across the crystal surface, glowing faintly as if sensing Ethan's presence. His breath caught as he stepped closer. His hand went instinctively to his uniform, to the silver heirloom pinned at his chest. He unclasped it, holding the worn metal up to the runes. The match was undeniable. The symbol etched into his family insignia glowed in perfect harmony with the markings on the wall. The same emblem, the same blood. Ethan staggered back, the weight of revelation slamming into him. Whatever had just begun between him and Celara, it had started long before either of them was born. Ethan's hand shook as the insignia pulsed against the glowing runes, light cascading through the chamber like a living heartbeat. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, and then, with a low hum, a section of crystal slid open. Inside lay a shard of pure translucent stone, etched with swirling characters, pulsing with its own rhythm. Kalis bowed his head, almost reverent. The last Empress hid this long ago. A memory crystal, forbidden even to the council. She said it would reveal the truth when the blood of two stars returned. Ethan reached out, the shard vibrating against his palm. The moment he touched it, visions tore through him, fleeting images of humans and Klytherians not as strangers, but as kin. Cities built together, children born with eyes of green fire and human laughter. Then the flames of war, a cataclysm, tearing them apart, the records buried, history rewritten. Ethan staggered, breath ragged. We used to be the same people." Kalis nodded grimly. "Terran and Klytherian, two branches of one root. Our leaders erased it, convinced purity was strength, but the truth never dies, it waits." Far above, in the sterile medical bay of the human encampment, Dr. Mira bent over a microscope, her eyes wide as she reviewed Ethan's blood samples. The energy surge from the right had left traces she couldn't explain, proteins that weren't human, structures that matched the genetic fragments the Klytherians had shared. And in the center of it all, patterns that didn't behave like biology at all. They behaved like memories. This isn't just DNA," she whispered. "It's a record, a living archive encoded in the bond." Her hands trembled as she pulled up the scan of Celara's own sample, obtained secretly from the air she exhaled during the ceremony. The sequences aligned like puzzle pieces. Together, they unlocked strands that flickered with bursts of holographic images, ancient battles, alliances, faces of beings long dead. The child isn't just a hybrid. It's carrying history inside its cells. Before she could process further, Captain Holt stormed in, his jaw clenched tight. He handed her a datapad, the message from Earth glowing in sharp red text. "Orders from High Command. If contamination threatens relations, I am authorized to neutralize him." His eyes locked on Mira's. "That means eliminate." Mira's lips tightened. Captain, if you do that, you won't just kill a man. You'll destroy the only bridge we may ever have. Holt's voice was stone. My job isn't bridges, it's survival. Back in the palace, the council convened again. Celara was brought in, her wrists bound by bands of crystal. Veyron stood triumphant, his voice dripping venom. She has betrayed us. She carries corruption in her womb. Celara straightened, her emerald gaze unbroken. I carry more than life, she said softly. Her hand pressed against her abdomen, and suddenly the chamber erupted in light. A wave of energy burst outward, shimmering gold and silver, flooding every surface. Counselors staggered back, their eyes wide as visions crashed into their minds. They saw children of two races playing together under twin suns, fleets built by hands of both human and Klytherian, and the great schism that had sundered them. They felt the sorrow of a people who had torn themselves apart, and the hope of what had once been. Every counselor collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of truth. Celara gasped, clutching her belly as the glow subsided. The unborn child had spoken, not with words but with memory. The palace of crystal shuddered as shock waves rolled through its foundations. Distant booms echoed like thunder, dust cascading from the vaulted ceiling as the war outside pressed closer. Through the translucent walls, flashes of light cut across the sky. Starships dueling above Azeron 9, their beams carving streaks of fire against the heavens. The first shots of war had already been fired. Ethan pushed his way into the great council chamber, heart pounding. Celara stood at its center, bound no longer, her bonds shattered by the energy her unborn child had unleashed. Yet she was surrounded by guards who didn't know whether to protect her or arrest her. At the far end of the chamber, General Veyron waited, crimson armor gleaming, his weapon leveled directly at her. His voice carried the weight of final judgment. She has defiled our bloodline with alien seed, Veyron roared, eyes blazing. That abomination inside her will be the end of us all. Strike her down before it is too late! Celara's chin lifted, defiant. It is not corruption I carry. It is our salvation. The truth is in the bond, in the child. You fear what you do not understand. Veyron's snarl twisted into something. Colder, almost pitiful. I understand enough. Purity is survival. Corruption is death. And I will not let a human soldier damn our people to extinction. His weapon shifted toward Ethan. And I will not let you live, Terran. Ethan's fists clenched. The air itself seemed charged, as if the crystal walls were listening. I've seen the truth, General. In dreams, in visions, in blood that isn't even mine. We were never meant to be enemies. We were one people long ago. The council murmured uneasily, but Veyron barked them silent. Lies spun by weakness. This human whispers poison into your ears. Look at him! Look at her! His weapon flared with power. They will doom us all! Then it happened. Celara doubled over, gasping, her hands pressed to her abdomen. A radiance burst from her body, brighter than before, flooding the chamber, in searing light. Every counselor, every soldier, every soul fell still as images erupted around them like living fire. They saw a time when humans and Klytherians were not divided, when their ancestors worked as one, crafting cities of crystal and steel, exploring the stars side by side. They felt the joy of unity, the agony of war, and the grief of being torn apart. And finally, they felt the heartbeat of the unborn child, a rhythm that tied it all together. The living bridge of two races made one again. Ethan staggered under the weight of it. The vision didn't just show him history, it showed him possibility. A galaxy healed, a future reborn. When the light faded, silence reigned. The counselors wept openly, shaken to their core. Celara straightened, her emerald eyes blazing. This is the truth your fear keeps buried. The child is not an abomination. It is the key to our survival. For the first time, Veyron hesitated. Doubt flickered across his face, but pride held him fast. His weapon trembled, but he didn't lower it. Before anyone could move, the chamber shook violently, harder than before. Through the crystal walls, streaks of light blazed brighter. The human fleet had arrived. Earth's ships cut through the sky, squaring off against Klytherian war cruisers already in orbit. From the comm relays in the chamber, a human voice crackled through, taut with urgency. "This is Captain Adrian Holt of the Earth vessel Resolute. Klytherian forces stand down, or we will defend ourselves." The Klytherian command channels thundered back, calling the humans invaders, demanding Ethan's surrender. Above Azeron 9, two fleets bristled with weapons, seconds away from annihilation. One wrong move, and the galaxy would burn. The council chamber trembled as the fleets above Azeron 9 prepared to unleash devastation. Weapons primed, engines roared, and one spark would ignite a war neither side could survive. Inside, all eyes locked on General Veyron. His weapon still, pointed at Celara, but his hands shook, crimson light from his armor flickering like a dying flame. He looked around, the counselors on their knees, overwhelmed by visions, the Empress standing tall despite chains, and Ethan Cross with fire in. His eyes ready to throw himself into the line of fire for a woman not of his world. Veyron's gaze finally fell on Celara's swelling form, her hand cradling the life within her. For a long, terrible moment, silence stretched. Then, with a heavy exhale that sounded more like defeat than surrender, Veyron lowered his weapon. The obsidian rifle clattered against the crystal floor, the sound ringing like a bell of judgment. "My life was built on lies of purity," Veyron said, voice rough, broken. "If this child carries the truth, then perhaps I have been the abomination." He sank to one knee, his crimson glow dimming to a dull ember. "Forgive me, my Empress." The tension snapped. Outside, orders rippled across the comms. Both fleets held fire, human and Klytherian commanders confused, waiting. Within the chamber, history had turned. Days later, the palace glowed with softer light. The war was over before it began. Celara lay upon a bed of shimmering crystal, attended by healers and guarded by Kalis. Ethan never left her side. When her cries rang out, they were followed not by silence, but by the cries of two newborns, twins, perfect and whole. The first was a girl, her skin pale but flecked with threads of silver that shimmered faintly, her eyes gleaming like starlight. The second was a boy, his hair a soft gold streaked with Klytherian fractal markings. Celara, exhausted but radiant, whispered their names, Aurora and Aegis. Dr. Mira arrived moments later, scanning the infants with shaking hands. Her face paled, then brightened with awe. "It's true," she whispered. "Their DNA, it's stable. They carry immunity to the sterility plague. Not just immunity, they carry the cure. The disease that has strangled the Klytherians for centuries ends here." Cheers erupted through the palace as news spread across channels. The council, once divided, now pledged allegiance to Celara. Messages flashed from Earth, voices filled with relief and disbelief. Within days, a treaty was signed, an alliance not of convenience, but of blood. Ethan Cross, the soldier who had stumbled into history, was named Earth's first permanent ambassador to the Klytherian Dominion. But the true shock was yet to come. As Celara cradled Aurora and Ethan lifted Aegis into his arms, the twins' eyes fluttered open for the first time. Everyone in the chamber leaned in, waiting for the cries of infants. Instead, the room froze as both children turned their heads in perfect unison. Their tiny mouths opened, and what came out was not the wail of the newborn. It was a voice. Two voices speaking as one, calm, resonant, ancient. The cycle is complete. The words cut through the chamber like thunder, too deliberate, too knowing to be chance. Counselors gasped, some fell back in shock, others whispered prayers. Dr. Mira dropped her scanner, her face drained of color. Ethan's heart hammered, his arms stiff around the infant in his grasp. The twins stared at them with eyes far too old, gleaming with knowledge. In that chilling, awe-striking instant, everyone understood. These children were not merely the bridge between two peoples. They were the return of something lost, vessels carrying the full memory of the ancient Terran Klytherian civilization, a rebirth of a world that had once spanned the stars. No one spoke. No one breathed. For the first time in centuries, both species stood united in silence, not in fear, but in the staggering realization that their future was already here, alive, in the arms of their empress and a human soldier. And as the newborn's eyes blazed with light, the crystal palace itself seemed to whisper back, as if recognizing its masters had finally returned.